On stimulus then, Jodi, are we any closer to a deal there? Earlier on this week, we were hearing Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats saying, look, the Republicans need to make some effort to meet us halfway. Now, there seems to have been a rethink in terms of the Democrats' strategy and timing for what they're asking for.
Yeah, so there's basically the Trump administration says it sees a possibility for Republicans and Democrats to agree on a smaller round of pandemic relief of about $500 billion that would omit the biggest areas of disagreement, that they might be able to reach this accord on issues like financial help for the Postal Service, more money for businesses to keep their workers employed, but they really remain very far apart on things like assistance for state and local governments and those stimulus checks. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer said they'd be willing to drop their proposal to $2 trillion. It's been as much as $2.5 trillion, and $3.5 trillion was what was passed in May. But they said they could compromise even further now. But the problem is the Senate is not in session, and we don't know when the Senate would be coming back into session. The House will be coming back into session this Saturday to vote on $25 billion in aid for the Postal Service. But both chambers have to negotiate, and they have to pass the same exact bill. So it could be weeks or maybe even months before this is done.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how long it could take to get a deal through both chambers of Congress. And I suppose if we have to wait for after the election, then there's a whole other set of unknowns then in terms of the makeup of the two houses and therefore how long it takes to get any kind of stimulus.
Well, that's right. And Nancy Pelosi had suggested earlier this week that Democrats, if they were willing to compromise, could maybe come up with a deal that's closer to the Republican number and then come back after the November election with additional agenda items, presuming, of course, that, hoping, I assume, that, the Democrats do well and that they'd be in a position to negotiate. But, of course, that may not be the case. So it really, it depends on a lot of factors here where they get and what number they get close to. In the meantime, there's a lot of people in the U.S. who are hurting, who need those checks, and businesses who need that money to keep their businesses open, given how how slow traffic is for many restaurants and retailers. So this is a real world kind of issue for many people in the United States, and it could play out in the election too. It may affect how people vote.